Previously on the Beam Chronicles.
You think if the masses see that video, heads won't roll for it?
We can't have a functional business relationship when one of us is blackmailing the other.
Then get used to a dysfunctional one.
So I paid Neil $500 to let me take some samples out of Sid.
Hello, Cidney.
And I tore his arm off. My father seemed excited. He regrew the arm, and Micah transformed from obsolete refuse to profitable. Micah was transferred. Micah adjusted poorly to that transfer. I do not want to decapitate you again, Micah.
No other way. No other way, Prince Kovorski. Do it again. Come on, then.
He was raining. I remembered. Then I remembered decapitating him with my bare hands and bringing the head to my father. I remembered all of this, did Micah? It was likely.
These are the Beam Chronicles, with your host, MJ Dooney. Book 2, Compromise. Chapter 10, Cidney Kovorski.
I would say my overall response to our newfound leverage over Peter Cranston was the same as my initial response. Joy, excitement, and no small amount of relief. With Prophet's mysterious absence from Beam HQ now going on its 5th month, the publicist was bar none the most present obstacle to our freedom, albeit still not nearly as terrifying and behavior-defining as the mere concept of Howie. With the advantage we now held over him, Peter was neutered of his primary threat, reporting our disloyalty to Prophet. And in severing this connection to the one man we all feared, we had left Peter largely powerless. Granted, to some extent we all still listened to him so as not to raise suspicion on his sudden change in tactics. We did publicity events, conventions, pressers, interviews, and the like. But the public relations department had a much less demanding way about them these days. Without Peter's constant nitpicky scrutiny, Jaxon was permitted to relax more in upholding his image. Charlie was not forced into appearances she was against, and I could redistribute my heavier caseload back to my partners with the easement of their obligations. Blackmailing Peter made things monumentally better, which is why I was uneasy with my, well, let us just call them my peripheral opinions. Maria Carraway once taught me that when I was truly unsure of something, it was a good idea to discuss it with someone else. Since she was in Colorado now, I instead took my troubles where I usually took them, my brother Phil. But before I could do that, we had to finish our video game. Phil had beaten me in 347 consecutive matches in this game, and I sought out to make my 348th defeat conclude with the tiniest shred of dignity. One more kill would bring me within 1 of his score, and while still a defeat, at least it would demonstrate my improvement. Alas, in the waning seconds of our bout, my avatar stepped across a grenade, detonating it and blasting him into the air, granting Phil yet another kill, me another death. I would have done better to remain hidden in my bunker as time expired, accepting defeat. Damn it. I angrily spiked my controller into the ground, and it shattered to pieces, but the bits began returning to their old formation quite quickly. Of all of Phil's inventions, this reassembling controller was probably the one I had most heavily made use of. I typically did some sort of damage to it following these losses, but today my frustration, and therefore the wreckage, was amplified by other considerations. Phil detected this elevated stress.
You okay, buddy? That was a pretty big slam, even for you.
Phil, when Jaxon obtained his video of Peter verbally abusing Charlie, why was I not involved? We were in California together, shooting that commercial. I was right there on set. I could have assisted in the acquisition, and yet he left me in the dark until he had already used it. I did not even hear about it before Charlie.
Well, I don't think he was trying to exclude you, Sid, if that's what you were thinking.
Phil reassured me.
But Jackson's not like that.
No, I suppose that would be out of character for him. I sighed, watching the remaining shards of controller reassemble at my feet. I just wish that he had told me, I suppose.
Maybe he was just keeping you out of it in case it blew up in his face. Give you plausible deniability or whatever, then once he had it locked down, didn't want to spoil the big reveal before he knew it worked or something?
Yes, that could be. That probably is what happened. Perhaps I am just being oversensitive. Phil stood as the screen we were playing on retracted into the ceiling. I scooped up the controller I had broken, now fully repaired, and handed it to him as he walked by to return them to the proper drawer. Then he asked me,
Do you know why I'm so much better at this game than you, Cidney?
Yes, keener dexterity, a better understanding of strategy, and a broader experience with the game.
All right, well, specifically that last one. I've practiced my whole life. I've been playing this series for as long as I can remember, and the guys I used to play, the Kovorski kids I lived with, were way better than me. So I spent a lot of time losing myself.
Ah, right. I nodded. I often forget about the disparity in our upbringings, brother. I referred to Phil as my brother, but we did not share any genetic markers. Arguably, neither of us were even human to the full extent. Our brotherhood was instead an indicator of a shared creator, the biological engineering genius Dr. Victor Kovorski. But while Kovorski raised me personally, treated me as his protege, successor, and true son, Phil spent a paltry amount of time in our father's presence. He was raised by a surrogate family as an infant and returned to us once he reached schooling age for education and developmental tracking. Along with several other less dangerous children of Kovorski, they all remained in a completely separate building from the laboratory in which I grew up, away from the beastly pack of our brothers, the stronger, more savage and dangerous of us. And together, these Phil-like children enjoyed a summer camp-style camaraderie, full of video games and tomfoolery until such time that Phil turned 14 and was given to Howie as an appeasement gift.
So that life I used to have, you know why I didn't tell you that I was a Kovorski right away?
I had always assumed you just forgot to mention it. During our first few meetings, there was hardly time for a thorough introduction. Phil had broken me out of my dungeon slumber on a few occasions to take samples before I was a member of Ava and against the wishes of Prophet. These meetings were often racked with nerves, rushed and jittery for fear of getting caught. There was little in the way of conversation.
Now that's true, and that's why I didn't tell you at first. But then after you got out and joined Ava, it took a while, you know? Like a month later, you came to me with it.
Yes, I recall. Maria told me first, as a matter of fact. Why did you not tell me, brother?
Because I was worried that when I described my childhood to you, you'd resent me for it. I have like parents and friends, and good ones, but still, I didn't know any better about that. It was a decent enough life for a kid from a test tube, and all I could have hoped for, honestly. We played games, watched TV, told jokes, all that. My life was fun, adequate, safe. Meanwhile, your whole life was just struggling and fighting and protecting your little sister. I didn't think it was fair. I didn't think you would count us as brothers, or if you did, you'd begrudge me for getting the better deal.
Phil, that is preposterous.
Well, now it is, yeah, because obviously we're brothers.
Phil pushed against my arm, but only succeeded in knocking himself off balance, skipping a bit to save himself from toppling over. He often tried to shove me hard enough that I budged, just when he thought I was not paying attention, but he could never accomplish it.
But anyway, that first month you were out, I kept it a secret because I didn't want to rub it in your face, or whatever.
I suppose that makes some amount of sense.
My point is, sometimes you don't tell someone something not because you don't care about him, but the opposite. It's just better if he doesn't know. You know what I mean. It's the same reason you want to tell Jaxon and Charlie about the leper case.
Indeed. I understand the concept, Phil.
So there you go. I'm sure that's all the more reason Jaxon didn't let you in on the Cranston blackmail thing. Don't worry about it too much.
And he was right. It was a childish and petulant thing to get upset about, but perhaps it was more an amalgamation of several things. Jaxon fetching the incriminating evidence without my help was just the latest case of me taking a backseat as a spectator in the games of Teak and Shade. The way they looked at each other, their inside jokes and private meetings, even the way they were constantly and passionately at odds over some inane topic, all of it indicated to me that somehow I was an ancillary part of their life equations. Charlie still could not group me. She grouped Jaxon for the first time during Flyfoon and had since explained to me that I was a much more difficult passenger, given my size and bizarre chemistry, yet in 2 years' time, she had made no progress. Was it still that I was so uncanny, or did she simply stop trying? Also, during my fight with Micah Single, they both ignored my request for assistance. I now knew they were in the shower. A perfectly reasonable excuse when taken in a vacuum. My partners deserved the chance to partake in basic hygienic ritual. Yet somehow, in light of these new troublesome considerations, the excuse failed to satisfy my need for an explanation. I did not like thinking about these concepts. This was all a selfish and petty way of observing two beautiful and enduring friendships. Charlie and Jaxon were permitted to regard each other as highly as they wished, without detriment to how highly they regarded me. I was more than satisfied with my relationship with Charlie and my relationship with Jaxon. Even if their relationship with each other was stronger, it was foolish and unfair to even attempt a comparison of such vastly different connections, assign them some inherent value or merit to be ranked, with one superseding the other. I was disgusted with myself for thinking it and wished to put these thoughts to bed, yet I still could not escape the intuition that something was amiss. There was something they were hiding from me, bigger than the Cranston tape, but somehow related. I decided to address it with Murphy next. Phil had already assured me that I was overthinking things. If Murphy did the same, I would know it to be true. I could not ignore the advice of both the smartest man and the wisest man that I knew. I waited until we were well on the road to that day's bus before I attempted to bring it up. Murphy was driving the truck, and I rode in the passenger seat. Given that this was another mission I was taking on solo, I did not wish to sit in the back by myself, and this particular truck, being a top-of-the-line model, was equipped with the proper self-adjusting suspension to accommodate the drastic disparity between my weight and Murphy's when I was riding shotgun. Beam had a solution to almost every problem. The anomaly we were busting was worthy of a decent consideration, but as had become common, made himself a much more desirable target via celebrity. He was a mystic, a channeler of the ancient arts, which typically meant complete bogus, and the evaluation report indicated he was indeed just an illusionist. Yet his charade was convincing enough to grant him a small army of loyal followers and no shortage of video cameras to record his idle threats against Beam. And while any team of equalizers would be more than sufficient firepower to handle a lying wizard and his cadre of gullible subjects, it was a much more poignant statement to thwart his entire uprising with a team of two. These sorts of purely demonstrative cases were really the only ones that would require Murphy and me, but not the rest of Ava. Incidentally, it granted me the opportunity I desired to talk privately with him. The trip was on the longer side. The base of the Anomaly's cult was a few hours from the capital, which gave us plenty of road time. As I was pretty unsure of what specifically was unsettling me beyond a sinking suspicion, I approached the subject in a roundabout manner and hoped Murphy's magical wisdom could ferret out the source. "How is your arm, Murphy?" I asked, referring to an injury he had sustained on a full Ava bust a week ago.
Huh? Oh, right. I'd almost forgotten all about it.
He lifted his right hand from the wheel and closed one eye to peer down the length of his forearm, from wrist to elbow, at the impressive scar stretching the whole way.
Medical, man. I'll tell you what, if we ever get out of the killing business, we could save a lot of lives.
The statement was tautological and self-fulfilling, but that did not detract from its pith. "I am surprised yours was the only serious injury. That was quite a raucous bust, and dizzying, I might add."
Sure was. That's the thing with unevaluated cases, they can go either way. Sometimes you get human tornado, other times it's Patrick the Lobster.
I frowned. I hated the occasional reminders that my pet lobster was once a satanistic shaman bent on global destruction. I loved him too much to think of him as anything else but the Patrick I knew. "Did he end up getting row 1? I asked. The Anomaly, Torrin Cloud. I had heard there was some debate amongst the Dungeoneers whether that was a waste of resources because he cannot generate a cyclone without a sufficient running start, thus any cell would hold him.
He did, yeah. He got row 1. Common sense, really, if he smacks, we want him someplace where we can lock him down before he gets out of control. Row 1 gives us all kinds of choices for that.
Murphy, I was wondering. It was slightly inorganic, but I had to segue into my Charlie and Jaxon problem before the topic shifted away from this bust. I know Charlie and Jaxon were adamant, but were you a little opposed to the notion that we did not equalize Cloud?
I guess a little bit, yeah. You seem like a loudmouth punk, reckless as a bronco and pretty dangerous, but heck, we can keep a guy alive, even a dangerous guy. I'm all for a little mercy. I kind of hope it's the sort of thing that gets swept under the rug quickly, though. I don't like to think about how Prophet would react to it.
Peter seemed strongly against the decision to contain him.
Which is probably why Shade started fighting for it. Honestly, if the little weasel knew what was good for him, he'd just stop voicing his opinions. Especially with you three, using that video to vice grip his scrotum.
I laughed at Murphy's tactful use of testicular humor, and the apparently infectious nature of my laughter made Murphy join in. Yes, well, I said when our merriment died away a bit. I am hardly a part of it. The bind on Peter's genitals is largely a Jaxon and Charlie production, as is this disturbing trend toward testing the boundaries of prophet's orders and rattling the cages a bit. They should not so brazenly be breaking the rules like they are.
What do you mean, buddy?
I'm not equalizing a man like Torrin Cloud, for example. It is noble, I suppose, but sometimes they act as though with Peter out of the way and Howie missing, there is nobody to keep them from doing whatever they wish. It concerns me.
Nah, I wouldn't lose sleep over that, Purple.
Murphy waved me off, then rustled his mustache.
They ain't rattling too hard, just enjoying the profit drought however they can. They know how to stick to little stuff, they're not dumb. And you know damn well if something goes out of line, how he'll show up and then readjust it, and they'll fall right back in.
Maybe this concern was the source of my tentative dismay over Jaxon and Charlie. I surprised myself a little when I expressed it, but then maybe it was just another example of them banding together, changing the culture of Beam without considering my opinions at all. It may have been an additional factor to my distress, but it was not the root cause. I was still unsettled.
I'll keep an eye out with you.
Murphy reassured me.
But we're still a few steps away from the level of disobedience where Prophet takes vengeance on them in some way more serious than a simple request. Start worrying when they run off to Aruba together or something.
Yes, together. There is no doubt of that. Perhaps they could send me a postcard. It was an attempt at self-deprecating humor that would perhaps enlighten my bigger issue of marginalization within the team. From here was only a small leap to the discussion I was driving toward, but then Murphy derailed my progress with a befuddling retort.
Yeah, like you'd want to go on that trip anyway. Wouldn't get to see much of the sights, I don't think.
Of course I would go, Murphy. I chuckled at the preposterous nature of his assertion. They are my closest friends, and Aruba looks like a lovely place. Why, we would have a grand time together where we all permitted simultaneous recreational travel. Murphy laughed, shaking his head.
I do not think you're quite catching the drift, buddy.
Obviously not, unless there is some horrible thing about Aruba that I am unaware of.
No, it's not Aruba, it's... Sid, I mean...
He drifted off, cocked a confused eyebrow at me, like he was unsure the level of my sincerity about something.
You're kidding, right? I just kind of assumed you pieced it together. I mean, you're basically the only guy who spends more time with them than me. And I know you're a bit off in the whole humanity department. They're super hush-hush about it, but don't tell me you don't know.
Murphy, that was incredibly cryptic and confusing. Please elaborate. He watched me for an instant longer, dangerously not paying attention to the road as he had a tendency for. Once he had gauged the full authenticity of my disarray, he finally asked me,
Sid, why would Charlie and Jaxon take a trip to Aruba and not bring you?
I do not think that they would. You are the one who is suggesting a hypothetical trip. My God, this conversation has gone crazy. And Murphy groaned in response to my proclamation, giving his mustache the most substantial rustle yet, nodding rhythmically to the road and pursing his lips. This was only exacerbating my concern for his mental well-being. Murphy, are you quite well?
Oh, I'm just fine, Big Purple. Busy calibrating just how many birds and just how many bees I have to give you here, you know. Given the talk isn't exactly my job description, do you still think babies come from the stork?
Accepting the words birds and stork, I think you have managed to construct the set of 3 sentences with the least bit of relevance to each other in the entire English language.
Look, man, it's not exactly my place to tell you.
But Murphy was abruptly interrupted by a loud thump. It came from above and behind us, the roof of the cargo area of the truck where I usually rode and where we stored anomalies for transport after a bust. The thump was followed by a boom, then another, and another, rhythmically, as if someone were on the truck and pounding to get in. Keep driving, Murphy. I unfastened my seatbelt and climbed into the back as the auto suspension adjusted flawlessly to the shift in weight. By the time I had made my way there, directly under the source of the knocking, and aimed my cannon up to cape back a hole into the roof, that hole was lacerated by another source instead. The blaring, grinding noise of tearing metal cut through the air as the man on our truck ripped into the top of it and taunted me.
Prince Kovorski!
I recognized that sing-songy voice, the thick Polish accent instantly. My ears were betraying me, surely, but then I glanced up. I saw him, his head covered in the plastered-together pieces of a fragmented skull. Impossible, I whispered.
Can you come to play now, Prince Kovorski, or do I have to crash this truck?
Murphy, conference fill into our earpieces. Call Charlie and Jaxon, I commanded.
What the hell's going on, Sid?
He nervously asked, glancing over his shoulder. It is my I quickly hesitated, not quite wanting to disclose this information yet. It is Leper. Tell Phil that Micah is back. And with that, I jumped through the hole that he had torn into our truck to meet him on the roof. The crispness of the March air was only amplified by the rushing winds as we barreled down the expressway, but the cold was the last thing on my mind in that moment, standing atop the truck and glaring at the man I had imprisoned in the dungeons not 2 months prior. Micah, you have escaped, I stated calmly.
Cidney, I always do.
How?
I am a resourceful man, brother Cidney.
He declared with an offended tone, surprised that I would doubt him.
And your prison most formidable, but not the worst I have been in, not the worst I have broken out from either.
An overstatement. Perhaps his memory of the cage Kovorski kept him in was distorted by the trauma and turmoil of his savagery. If you put an animal into any cage, they are unhappy and hardly concern themselves with the size of it. If you are not going to tell me how you escaped, could you at least explain why you are here? Your freedom was secured and you seek out the man who deprived you of it.
Deprived me twice.
He smugly reminded me of that day in the rain. That alley. I shuddered away instantly, focusing on the impending fight. Indeed, are you a glutton for punishment, Micah? Or are you too stupid to realize I am stronger, smarter, faster?
Humbler.
He teased, but I ignored him. Larger, more versatile, younger, and better supported than you.
And yet again you stand alone.
He pried into a deeper wound than he knew.
And perhaps you should not be standing at all, eh?
And as Micah ducked into a crouch, I spun to look over my shoulder at the rapidly advancing overpass. I knew if I hit it, I would either be thrown from the truck or shatter the road itself, but there was no time to deliberate. People were driving on that overpass, innocent bystanders, and while beam protocol dictated that the bust was my primary objective, this technically was not a bust. I jumped into the air high and quick enough to narrowly clear the overpass, but on my descent, I was struck with a barrage of calcified arms to the stomach and face, toppling me into a series of somersaults, deflecting my trajectory off its course. I missed the truck, impacted the freeway with a heavy boom in a deep crater, and skidded, rolling end over end until I slowed to a stop. For a moment, my momentum ceased with me in a headstand, precariously balanced until I fell onto my back. Asshole, I grumbled, hoisting myself onto my feet amongst the swerving and horn-wheeling traffic, now essentially at a piled-up standstill behind me as I watched Micah ride the truck into the distance. That is when I realized I had left Murphy alone with my deranged brother. Murphy, are you all right? I urgently spoke into my comm.
Fine. I'll try to shake him, but get back here quick before he remembers how cars work and tries to take it out on the driver, all right? Phil's on his way. I can't get Charlie or Jaxon to pick up.
Of course. Eager to return to the fracas and assist Murphy, I briskly perused the wreckage of traffic for a bulkier-sized pickup. Once I had it located, I politely knocked on the window of the driver's side door. Good day. What is your name and hauling capacity?
Half-ton, I think. The name's, Lester.
Perfect. I grinned, then crawled beneath the truck, hoisted it onto my back, and pressed it above my head. I quickly jogged through the other cars stuck on this road, ignoring the angry protests of the drivers, until I was in the front of the pack, then gently returned Lester's vehicle to the pavement, hopping into the bed and tapping the roof of his cab. Make haste, Lester, I called out, extending a finger toward the beam vehicle disappearing ahead of us, jerking left and right in an effort to knock Micah single from the top. And Lester, through his starstruck obfuscation, jammed the accelerator. He was a noble steed, a valiant wheelman, and the open road my accident had generated suited Lester's lead foot well. We were briskly but a few seconds away from the battle. But there was a faster vehicle approaching, and I could hear its familiar hum distantly behind me.
Need a lift, Sid?
Phil's voice came into my ear through the telecom. I held on to the top of the truck and leaned around to Lester's window. Thank you for your brief assistance, my friend, I shouted. You were most valuable. But this is where I leave you. A faster route has presented itself, and I must take it.
Huh?
Was all he could manage to spit out. I like Lester, a charming and interesting individual, albeit a bit unkempt. But it was already time to leave him for greener pastures. I returned to my upright standing position on the bed of his truck and lifted my arms into the air just as Phil's hovercraft zoomed overhead, latching onto the edge of it and hoisting myself up. Thank you, brother.
Sure thing. Coming up on him now, Sid.
Phil gestured with his head from the driver's seat at the beam truck we were now closing in on. I coiled my legs into a prepared crouch, then sprung from Phil's platform into a diving tackle, wrapping my arms around Micah's trunk and dislodging his limbs from their socket as I propelled him off the front of the vehicle. We soared through the air for a quarter-mile before we hit the pavement. This time I had Leper to break my fall, and I pressed his face into the asphalt to ensure he got the brunt of the skid. Again, we caused a sufficient backup with traffic, as all of the cars we had flown over swerved and collided to avoid us. Thank you for not harming Murphy. I peculiarly found myself remarking once I had him secured face down under my knee, watching his arms and legs regrow.
Pah!
He spat a bit of blood, maybe a tooth.
What interest would I have in harming useless old men?
If you are not here for mindless destruction, then what is your motivation?
I am here for memories, my brother. Memories of fratricide.
And he thrust the back of his head into my nose, disorienting me, allowing himself free from my pen. He scattered forward to his feet, then doubled back, shoving me aside as he reached out and grabbed the front bumper of a car from the pile up behind us. As I purposefully strode after him, he spun around once and flung the car into the air on a collision course with Phil's approaching hovercraft. Fratricide, he was not referring to me. No! I bellowed as the vehicles clashed in the air, erupting into a pyrotechnics display that would surely be Phil's demise. But to the intense relief of my shattered heart, I caught a glimpse of the parachute above it, Phil, drifting slowly back to Earth, having ejected before Micah's attack. He was alive. The same could not be said for the woman in the car. And Glepper laughed. He laughed wildly and madly at the volatile, pointless murder and destruction. The rage within me hit its peak at the precise moment that I grabbed him by the top of his skull and flung him over my head like a ragdoll, slamming him into the pavement, audibly cracking his spine. Through the pain of this ordeal, through the blatant paralysis, Micah did not stop laughing. I furiously kicked him in the stomach, and his body rotated like a whistling turbine through the air, then skipped along the barren highway 100 yards away from me. But when his bouncing ceased, and I bounded up beside him, he was still laughing, only hesitating to expectorate another mouthful of blood. I dropped to one knee, again grabbing the top of his head and slammed it into the ground repetitively. Stop laughing! I growled. With 2 successive craters, his cranium broke into the pavement. But alas, he did not stop. I could not proceed while he persisted, and had made it clear that I was his physical superior, so I retreated from my attack. He rolled onto his back, then eased up to a seated position, having recovered from the paralysis.
Memories. Just like old times, brother.
He remarked, spitting another shot of blood onto the ground beside him and wiping his face. He then began the repulsive process of removing the bits of himself damaged during my furious assault, reaching behind his back to pluck a few calcified vertebrae out from beneath his skin, the same for a quarter of his ribcage where I had kicked him, and again for the fragment of skull I had busted into the ground. I watched as the far from precise surgical incisions he had mangled with his own fingers healed into nothing, as the teeth I had knocked out regrew behind those of the skull patchworked around his head. The portion of his face he had wrenched off grew back last, and for the first time since the day in the rain, I saw part of that face unobstructed by his macabre mask.
It is actually nice to see that some things do not change, Prince Kovorski. The monster you were still in there, just as I suspected. Just needed a little bit coaxing, eh? Memories.
And the fiendish grin stretched tighter across his blood-stained face.
There is one left to relive, though.
He reached over his own head, wrapping his first 2 fingers around the top lip of his eye sockets, and then jerked his chin up. And suddenly I realized why he had sought me out. Micah wanted me to decapitate him again. I am not the same, Micah, I panted, still winded from my unbridled berserker rampage. And I will not do it again.
You have no choice, Cidney. I have ensured our green brother is not helping you this time. No sedative, no choice. So come now. Do the deed for the memories, Prince Kovorski.
Where were Jaxon and Charlie? Where were my teammates now? Well, I stood there grappling with my tortured past. I needed them now. More than ever, I needed them, and they were not here. Why? You broke out just to torment me. I desperately begged him, stalling for more time. Time for Phil to find his feet and rush to my aid. Time for my teammates to pick up their pages and save myself from myself.
I broke out for memories.
Please, stop incessantly repeating that same random word, I shouted. He cackled some more.
It is not random. Memories are important, brother. When you are alone, they are all you have. Good ones to keep you warm, bad ones to keep you cold. But they're all important to who you are. You cannot be so selective, Cidney, in the things you choose to remember and the things you choose to forget.
I have forgotten nothing, brother. I accept the monster that I once was. I know that my father made me into one, but I have changed. I am not like that anymore.
No, of course. You are worse. Much worse. Worse because you think you're better. You think you compensated, overcome your past, but instead you just ignore it. Prince Kovorski may be strongest, bravest, most cunning. I cannot defeat him, but I will destroy him. How? The very same way Father destroyed me. I will drive the bad memories back into you until they devour the good, and you are left sobbing in alley in rain for some mindless soldier to tear you to pieces.
There seemed to be more to Micah's story than I knew, and under normal circumstances I would not care, but I needed more time for someone to rescue me. What did he do to you? It is not possible for you to hate our father more than I do, leper. Tell me what he did. He smirked and nodded, then began to stand up, and I pressed the cannon on my wrist against the thigh of my jeans, striking it like a match into a crackling spiral, extracting K-Pack into its chamber and aiming it at his face. Do not be so comfortable, brother. If I melt you, there will be nothing to grow back. I growled. He returned to his seat on the pavement.
One day,
He said, licking a spot of blood off his bottom lip before settling into the story.
Kovorski decides I am useful. I can regenerate body, heal any injury. I can make him big money, sell to rich doctor, pharmaceutical, fund a more important project. Only he had problem. Who would invest in me as I was? Who would pay for raging madman with magic regrowing body? I could not recover my mind the way I did my arms or legs. I could not be made normal, respectable like Prince Kovorski without redo. Redo of entire lifetime of memories.
And he sneered the last word with such disgust it broke a blood clot in his mouth, and he paused to spit yet again.
Kovorski had apparatus hidden in the wings of his lab where he kept me. It gave me new life, new past, new memories, a loving father, a brother.
His upper lip trembled through the snarl as he finally met my eyes. Within them was only betrayal. I could not look away.
But Kovorski neuroscience not so good as Kovorski genetic engineering. Perhaps I was not so important. Perhaps I was on back burner. Yeah, Papa was distracted with the beam man, and he did a good job with the brainwash. Maybe just forget to brain dry. Because the memories, they were a mix I am a boy, learning and playing with my brother, and then I am a brute, clawing and biting him. I teach him to ride a bike, he tears off my arm. There is laughter and happiness and warmth, and then there is blood, gnashing teeth and howling. They are both there, Brother Cidney, still. Still, I remember all of the good and all of the bad, but I know which is real and which is bullshit. He forgot to take the bad ones out. Cidney, he forgot to take them out!
And he clenched his fingers around his head, feverishly shaking as he screamed through his teeth, trying to physically remove the memories with his own hands. I could do nothing but stare, still extending my arm cannon at him, prepared to fire at this pitiful, broken, truly insane man. My brother. He finally stopped his hysterical convulsions, finally relaxed to the ground and tried to catch his breath. Micah, for what he did to you, for what I did, I am sorry.
You are sorry.
I feebly nodded as he scoffed and shook his head.
Do you know what is worse, Cidney? Do you know what is worse than knowing only the painful memories are true? A single second of hope in alley, in the rain. That perhaps there is one speck of the good that is real.
Micah, please, I did not know. Had I known...
No sorry, no forgiveness, no reconcile. We are well past that. Brother, I do not get the luxury, Cidney. I do not get the luxury to forget I am monster. I was supposed to forget, and I don't. I can't. You should not if I can't.
I pitied him for what he was, because in a sense it was myself. The good stories and the bad stories of my past mixing together, longing for the warm ones, but knowing only the cold were truly real. I could relate to that. But there were important differences between us. It was deeper than my circumstances. It was deeper than my good fortune. Our lives were unfair, Micah. What happened to you was unfair. I can help you overcome it if you would let me, but if you wish to forget that you are a monster, perhaps the first step would be to stop acting like one.
And the best joke is that you think you've stopped acting like monster.
My whole body ran cold, because I suddenly realized that I could not refute it. What I had become, it did not matter how many fans adored me, how many chicken nuggets I sold, how many villains I thwarted. I was still an agent of genocide, a murderer, a monster. Just like Micah, only cleaner, more proper. His harsh cackle rattled in my head, but it was quickly, mercifully drowned out by the deafening blast of a large caliber shotgun, and fired from such a close range as Murphy had directly into the side of Micah's skull. There was not much left of his head.
Always carry a big fucking gun.
Murphy said, ejecting the empty shell and resetting the safety.
Equalization 101. His head grows back though, right?
It does. I distractedly stared at the gory, decapitated body of my brother, reminding myself that technically it was not me this time who took his head, it was Murphy. I was not the same as I was then. I was not the same. It will take some time, though. We can transport him back. We will have to get the Mystic tomorrow.
Mystic? Oh, right, the bus. Jesus, buddy, you're kind of spacing out on me here.
He rested his hand on my shoulder and lightly rubbed it.
Something happened?
He is my brother, Murph. I assume that you heard our conversation over the comms. I quietly said as the image of his spine following his head out of his body flashed into my mind. I felt sick to my stomach, and on top of that, so harrowingly alone.
You had it right, Sid. What you said to him at the end there, what happened in the past, you can't change that. Who you were, what Kovorski made you do, all that matters is who you are now. And now, you're better than he is. You could have been like Leper. You could have broken out of the dungeons and rampaged and hurt people, but you didn't.
I hurt people every day, Murphy. Sometimes they are guilty, but Other times they are innocent.
That isn't your fault, and you know it. You don't have any choice. You know Prophet would just torture you and all the people you loved until you listen to him again. Besides, we do some bit of good every now and then, right? Leper does it.
I blamed Kovorski, now I blame Prophet. There is always some other person at fault when I consider my transgressions, but what I am I really any better than Micah?
Yes.
He answered me sternly without hesitation.
Simply because you asked that question. You care enough to try to be better. You want to be better. And hell, I'm no good myself, Sid. I sure don't have any place judging your morality, but at least you give a shit. You beat Mike on just that.
It felt insufficient. I still felt miserable. Watching the blood gush out of Leper's neck, I still felt like a rotten, broken monster, just like I used to be. But I did not get the chance to dwell on that consideration any longer because Phil returned to us.
Sid, you okay, bud?
He urgently asked me once he found his way through the traffic pileup to the clearing Murphy and I were in. I am fine, brother. Glad to see you have made it out yourself.
Bastard broke my hovercraft, though.
He scowled disappointedly.
I mean, I have spares, but still, damn near killed me. You didn't...
No, luckily Murphy arrived and saved me from the torment of beheading Micah again. I did not do it. I added the last part as an assurance to myself. Perhaps hearing the words out loud would help them to sink in.
Damn, Murphy, nice work, headshot.
Thanks, Green. Gun did most of the heavy lifting, though.
Uh-huh. Hey, you think that marksmanship translates into video games? Sid and I were trying to start up a guild, but we realized we're the only two people who played.
A thought occurred to me in this moment, that if Kovorski could fabricate memories for Micah, it was possible Phil's upbringing was drastically more tragic than he thought. Truthfully, I always wondered what became of his old companions after the beam bust of Kovorski's lab. It would make the most sense that they never did exist in the first place. That his entire borderline happy childhood was a fabricated illusion to keep him sane. I decided this was one of those things you do not tell a person because you like them. Then I never did.
Thank you for listening to The Beam Chronicles, a fiction podcast written and produced by me, MJ Dooney. Sorry for missing last week's episode. I was super sick, and one of the primary symptoms I was dealing with was my voice completely disappeared. Literally my moneymaker. I tried recording anyway. I thought if I whispered into the microphone, the voice editor could fix it up, but no, it sounded awful. So I took a little break. I feel much better now. I hope you didn't miss me too much. Follow me on socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. If you can draw, contact me, beamchronicles@gmail.com. You can contact me also if you can't draw, but you just want to say hi. I actually haven't gotten an email in like months, so if you want to just tell me you're having fun with the show, or that you hate it, or that you hate me, or that you love me, just let me know. If you have not already given me 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this, please do so. It would help the show quite a bit. All music and sound effects were sourced from the Epidemic Sound Library. Special thanks to Sergio Duarte for creating the cover art for the show. Thanks one more time for listening. I appreciate it greatly. That's all. Goodbye.